Part 1. Hitler's Occult Obsession, Dark Myths of the Third Reich. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Tonight we begin with something a little different. Not the usual bedtime story, but more like a slow, hypnotic journey into the very peculiar mind of one of history's most infamous figures. So, dim the lights, get comfortable, maybe grab a blanket. We're going to drift through the strange, the eerie, and the outright bizarre spiritual fascinations of Adolf Hitler. Don't worry, it's all calm, we won't rush, and we certainly won't make this feel like a thriller. Instead, we'll float along through history, one weird belief at a time. Now, Hitler, as most of us know, was an unremarkable painter turned demagogue. But beneath that familiar public persona lay a fascination with the occult. And when I say fascination, I mean he treated it like a very important hobby, much like some people collect stamps or make TikTok videos about historical reenactments. But of course, he was a bit more grandiose about it. He didn't just have a shelf of books, he surrounded himself with mystical ideas, secret societies, ancient symbols, and a very selective reading list that mostly confirmed whatever terrifying worldview he already had. Let's start gently, with the Thule Society. Now, Thule wasn't a rock band or a secret lemonade recipe. It was a German occultist group, obsessed with Aryan mythology, the idea of a mystical northern homeland, and a lot of symbols that today mostly make historians sigh and roll their eyes. They believed that the Aryan race originated from a lost land called Thule, somewhere icy and mysterious. It was like Tolkien, but with more beards and fewer hobbits. Hitler, in his early political years, brushed shoulders with people from this society, absorbing their ideas about racial purity and destiny. And yes, destiny in this sense was something he took very seriously, unlike me deciding if I should have toast or cereal in the morning. As we drift further, let's notice a pattern. Hitler liked things that felt ancient, hidden, or secret. He was drawn to mystical relics, particularly the Spear of Destiny. Ah yes, the Spear of Destiny. According to legend, this was the very spear that pierced the side of Jesus as he hung on the cross. And of course, owning this spear supposedly grants you control over the world. Now, whether he believed it literally or just liked to imagine himself in a very niche superhero movie is debatable, but it's a classic example of how historical figures sometimes combine ambition with, let's call it, imaginative shopping habits. Hitler didn't stop at societies and artifacts. He had a fascination with astrology and prophecy. There was this astrologer named Karl Ernst Kraft who gained a certain prominence in Nazi circles. Apparently, Hitler occasionally took advice based on star charts and ominous planetary alignments. One could almost picture him staring out of a window, squinting at the stars and murmuring, Mars is in retrograde, maybe I should delay the invasion plan by a week. Of course, he didn't delay anything, but the point is, he flirted with these ideas as if they were legitimate planning tools. Let's float over to another royalish disaster of thought, the Vril Society. Now this one is more fringe, more speculative, and a little harder to confirm, but it's fun to imagine. The Vril Society purportedly believed in a mysterious energy called Vril, which could be harnessed by advanced Aryans to achieve remarkable feats. Think of it as historical fan fiction, really. But Hitler's fascination with underground powers and secret energies was part of a larger pattern. He liked believing that there were unseen forces, forces that could be manipulated, forces that might explain why he, of course, was destined for greatness. And speaking of unseen forces, Hitler's interest in Germanic paganism and Teutonic myths is noteworthy. He often romanticized a pre-Christian, heroic past with runes, heroic sagas, and a lot of vague notions about ancestral spirits guiding modern leaders. Some historians argue that he wanted to replace Christianity with a kind of state-controlled paganism, though not in a very organized, coherent way. More like a collage of symbols, rituals, and very intense weekend workshops about Viking ancestors. Now here's a quieter, slightly more tragic note. Hitler's obsession with the occult also had a deeply personal component. He seemed to seek control over fate, over life and death, over the randomness of human existence. The obsession wasn't just mystical trivia, it was intertwined with his paranoia, his need for certainty, and his unrelenting drive to believe he was special. In a sense, you could think of the occult as a kind of security blanket for a man who feared unpredictability more than most of us fear running out of Netflix shows. The Reich Chancellery, by the way, was not just a political headquarters, but also a place filled with symbolic art and objects. Some of these items were ancient-looking statues, others were supposed magical artifacts. One could wander through and imagine a very slow, deliberate aesthetic experience designed to remind visitors that they were in the presence of someone who was in tune with mystical forces. Or, more likely, someone who liked the idea of being in tune while everyone else worried about administrative memos and budget reports. And as we continue our drift through history, it's worth noting that Hitler's advisors often played along with his interests. Heinrich Himmler, the leader of the SS, shared similar obsessions, particularly with Germanic mysticism and ritual. Himmler went so far as to create a pseudo-religious, highly ritualized lifestyle for the SS. Imagine if your office had mandatory meditations, rune-inscribed uniforms, and an ongoing, very serious discussion about the spiritual significance of ancient swords. It was kind of like that, except with an unsettling undertone of obsession and political power. Of course, not everyone in Hitler's circle was equally enchanted. Some found it amusing, others found it tiresome. But the pattern remained. Mystical symbols, ancient myths, and pseudo-scientific ideas were part of the aesthetic, a part of the mythology that surrounded Hitler and his vision of Germany. He cultivated a world in which history, myth, and destiny were intertwined in a way that, frankly, sounds exhausting to live through. Hitler also had an interest in archaeological expeditions. Himmler, ever the devoted follower of mystical hobbies, organized journeys to supposedly sacred Germanic sites. These expeditions were part archaeology, part ideological theater. They were designed to create a tangible connection to an imagined glorious past. Picture a slow caravan of SS officers trudging through forests and mountains looking for runes and relics, while telling each other stories about heroic ancestors. It's almost quaint if you ignore the underlying political intentions. And so, as the night wears on, we can settle into the rhythm of these obsessions. It's a pattern of fascination with the unseen, the ancient, the mystical, and the powerful. Hitler's occult interests weren't the most dangerous part of his life, but they reveal a lot about how he thought, how he sought control, and how he surrounded himself with symbols of power and destiny. It's an eerie, almost sleepy parade of myths and artifacts, each chosen to reinforce an image of inevitable greatness. Let's pause briefly, just for a moment, to appreciate the absurdity and mundanity of it all. Here was a man whose daily reality was filled with mundane politics, yet his mind wandered through legends, stars, and lost relics. It's like watching someone meticulously arranging a very elaborate Lego set while simultaneously planning an office budget. The contrast is oddly soothing to contemplate if you let it be. We'll continue this slow exploration in the next segment, where we'll drift further into Hitler's fascination with mysticism, secret societies, and the peculiar ways these beliefs influenced the Third Reich. For now, just let your mind rest on the gentle oddity of it all, the soft, strange patterns of obsession and myth that filled the quiet corners of one of history's most infamous minds.
Part 2. Hitler's Occult Obsession, Dark Myths of the Third Reich, continued. Welcome back, friends. As we gently settled into part 2 of our slow exploration, let's glide a little deeper into the labyrinth of Hitler's mystical and esoteric interests. Remember, this is bedtime history. Soft, unhurried, and with just enough dry humor to keep your mind awake but not jumpy. Continuing where we left off, one of the most curious aspects of Hitler's occult fascination was the extent to which he relied on pseudoscientific archaeology and esoteric lore to construct a version of history that suited him. Himmler, ever the faithful and slightly obsessive partner in myth-making, often sponsored expeditions to sites supposedly imbued with ancient Aryan significance. There were caves, mountains, even obscure ruins scattered across Europe, and each was meticulously examined for artifacts that might confirm the supremacy of a mystical Aryan lineage. It was archaeology meets fan fiction, and for some reason they took it very seriously. Hitler also spent an inordinate amount of time contemplating relics and symbols, particularly the swastika. Not the modern connotations we all know, but the ancient origins, the supposed mystical power, the circular symmetry that spoke to some lost perfect world. It was, of course, a design he adopted with dramatic flair, because why not transform a symbol with thousands of years of history into the logo of an empire? There's a certain mundane elegance to that, isn't there? Just casually rebranding millennia of symbolism for one man's vision. And then there's the story of the Black Sun. Perhaps one of the more ethereal obsessions, this symbol was tied to SS mysticism and the supposed energy of the cosmos. It appears in the floor of Wewelsburg Castle, which Himmler used as an ideological retreat and SS think tank. The castle was filled with runes, ceremonial rooms, and long tables where officers could sit and imagine themselves as conduits of ancestral power. Hitler, although not personally decorating the castle, was certainly aware of these symbols and believed they tied into a larger cosmic order he was attempting to command. There's a quieter, slightly melancholic obsession as well, Hitler's belief in prophecy. He was captivated by the writings of people who claimed to foresee the destiny of Germany or the world. One such figure was Guido von List, whose work combined Germanic mysticism with notions of racial destiny. Hitler read and referenced these ideas, not unlike a man thumbing through self-help books, but with considerably more dire consequences. There's a gentle irony here, a man so intent on controlling reality, turning to texts that promised he already knew it all. Let's drift for a moment to astrology, which we touched on before. It wasn't an all-consuming interest, but it was enough to color decisions in subtle ways. Hitler consulted astrological charts, perhaps seeking reassurance that his plans were aligned with cosmic forces. Think of it as checking the weather before a long journey, except the forecast is determined by the alignment of planets instead of clouds. Whether he genuinely believed or simply liked the ritual is still debated, but the quiet obsession remains an interesting footnote in the otherwise loud, chaotic narrative of his life. Then there's the curious intersection of pseudoscience and imagination, the myth of Atlantis. Hitler was reportedly fascinated by tales of this lost civilization, which he linked to Aryan supremacy. The idea of a technologically advanced, morally perfect ancient race must have appealed to his inner narrative. Atlantis, in this sense, became a symbol of what he thought modern Germany could reclaim, a utopian vision filtered through mythology and propaganda. Now, the personal side of these obsessions is rather telling. Hitler surrounded himself with advisors and enthusiasts who shared, or at least indulged, his interests. He seemed to enjoy being the central figure in a circle of people who spoke in symbols, ancient languages, and elaborate allegories. It's almost cozy to picture him, after long days of speeches and strategy, sitting quietly in a dim room, discussing the energies of relics or the fate of civilizations, with men who nodded solemnly in agreement. It's oddly domestic if you ignore the context. Himmler, as a case study, is particularly fascinating. He didn't just support Hitler's mystical leanings, he expanded upon them, creating a whole pseudo-religious structure within the SS. From runic ceremonies to meditative practices, he tried to cultivate an elite order that was both militaristic and spiritual. Imagine, if you will, a very slow, very serious yoga retreat, but with uniforms and a rigid hierarchy. There's something quietly absurd and yet oddly mesmerizing about the image. Hitler's fascination with relics extended to objects with alleged supernatural power. The Spear of Destiny, as we mentioned, was only the beginning. There were other artifacts, sometimes claimed to be of mystical or prophetic importance, which he acquired or had advisors acquire. Each object, real or imagined, was a small affirmation of a worldview in which history, myth, and power were deeply intertwined. He treated these artifacts as more than curiosities. They were talismans of destiny, comforting tools for a man obsessed with control. And let's not forget the broader mythological framework: Germanic legends, Teutonic heroism, and Nordic ancestry. These narratives were filtered through Nazi ideology, creating a tapestry of heroic destiny and racial mythology. Hitler consumed these stories, rewrote them in his mind, and used them as justification for policies, speeches, and even military campaigns. It's a gentle, almost hypnotic process, like a bedtime story, that gradually shapes your perception of reality. And finally, a note on subtlety. Not all of Hitler's occult interests were about grand designs or public displays. Some were private rituals, personal meditations, and quiet fascinations. He could spend hours examining symbols, contemplating prophecies, or discussing relics with trusted confidants. These moments were calm, almost serene in their intensity, a slow current under the turbulent surface of history. So, as we drift to the end of Part 2, we can appreciate the gentle absurdity and quiet obsession that defined this aspect of Hitler's life. There's a slow rhythm to it. Symbols, myths, relics, and cosmic alignments, all woven into the fabric of one of history's most infamous minds. It's not exciting, not dramatic, just a long, meandering current of belief, curiosity, and perhaps a touch of self-delusion. We'll continue in Part 3, exploring even more of Hitler's mystical interests, the influence on his inner circle, and the peculiar ways the Third Reich flirted with the occult. For now, let your mind settle on these soft, strange patterns, the calm, meticulous layering of myth over reality, as we slowly drift further into history.
Part 3. Hitler's Occult Obsession, Dark Myths of the Third Reich, continued. Welcome back for Part 3, where we continue our slow and steady exploration of the peculiar world of Hitler's mystical fascinations. If you're still comfortably tucked in, perhaps a warm drink nearby, we can drift further into the quiet, strange world of the Third Reich's occult leanings. Now, we've touched on Hitler's personal fascination and the influence of advisors like Himmler. Let's examine how this translated into cultural and ceremonial practices within the Nazi elite. Himmler, in particular, was committed to creating an environment that combined ritualistic elements with ideology. The SS, under his guidance, became more than a military organization. It was a kind of spiritual order, complete with ceremonies, symbolic regalia, and an almost meditative approach to what they considered their sacred duty. If you imagined a very slow-moving pageant where every gesture has an esoteric meaning, you were on the right track. One of the key components of this pseudo-religious system was the use of runes. These ancient symbols were adapted to represent various SS divisions and ideals, transforming archaic Germanic scripts into tools of identity and mystique. Hitler reportedly approved of these symbols, seeing them as visual representations of the supposed spiritual strength of the Aryan race.
There's something quietly obsessive in the meticulous arrangement of runes, their ritualistic use, and the careful cultivation of an aesthetic designed to reinforce ideology. The castles and estates associated with the SS, particularly Wewelsburg, were almost entirely designed to serve as centers of mystical practice and ideological reinforcement. The central hall, with its black sun symbol inlaid on the floor, acted as a focal point for ceremonies. Officers would gather in slow, deliberate processions, participating in rituals meant to strengthen bonds, honor ancestors, and internalize the mythic worldview of their leaders. It's all very measured, almost hypnotic in its repetition, like a bedtime chant for grown adults in uniform. We can also pause to consider the psychological aspect. Hitler's occult interests and the ritualized practices of the SS created a controlled environment where certainty, order, and symbolic power were paramount. In an otherwise chaotic and brutal reality, the calm repetition of ceremonies, the careful arrangement of symbols, and the obsessive focus on ancient artifacts provided a kind of psychic structure. It's like organizing a very complicated jigsaw puzzle in your mind, only the puzzle is history, destiny, and cosmic influence. Let's drift briefly to the topic of sacred relics again. Beyond the spear of destiny, Hitler and his inner circle collected and revered objects that they believed carried historical or mystical power. Some of these artifacts were claimed to confer legitimacy, others to bestow strength or foresight. The degree to which these objects influenced actual decisions is unclear, but their presence contributed to a steady rhythm of ritual and symbolic reinforcement. Each artifact was a small node in a network of belief, quietly shaping perceptions and behavior. Another slow-moving current within the Third Reich was interest in ancient Germanic paganism. Hitler and his followers idealized a pre-Christian past filled with heroic myths, sacred groves, and ancestral spirits. Festivals, ceremonies, and holidays were sometimes reimagined through this lens, stripping away Christian elements and replacing them with reconstructed rituals. It was less about authenticity and more about creating a narrative that fit the ideology. One could imagine slow processions through forests, the soft crunch of leaves under boots, officers murmuring recitations of heroic sagas, all carefully curated to instill a sense of grandeur and continuity. It's easy to imagine officers carefully brushing dust off stones while recounting ancient tales, the forest quiet around them, the weight of imagined history pressing softly on their shoulders. In addition, Hitler's fascination with the occult extended into a careful cultivation of environment and symbolism. His residences, offices, and meeting spaces were filled with objects and art meant to convey historical gravitas or mystical significance. There were paintings, sculptures, and artifacts arranged to remind visitors and perhaps himself of cosmic forces at play. It's all very slow, deliberate, and methodical, like arranging a room for optimal napping, but with more symbolic weight and less comfort. We can't overlook the personal dimension. Hitler's obsession with mysticism and ritualized practices served in part as a coping mechanism. The world of politics, military strategy, and war is unpredictable and harsh. The slow, quiet rituals, the meditation on relics and symbols, the careful consideration of prophecies, all of these created a controlled mental environment. It's as if the calm repetition of symbolic acts could counterbalance the chaos of reality, allowing a man obsessed with control to feel some semblance of order. So as we slowly drift through Part 3, we can appreciate the soft cadence of these obsessions. Ritual, symbol, prophecy, and relic all intertwine to form a quiet undercurrent beneath the louder, more violent surface of history. There's a slow rhythm here, a methodical layering of belief and imagination over the stark realities of power. It's not thrilling, it's not dramatic, but it is strangely hypnotic in its consistency and quiet intensity. In Part 4, we will continue this gentle journey, exploring the aftermath, the myths that persisted after the war, and the soft, enduring legacy of these curious obsessions. For now, let your mind settle on the careful, deliberate patterns, the ritualized motions, and the quiet obsession that defined a shadowy corner of history.
Part 4. Hitler's Occult Obsession, Dark Myths of the Third Reich. Conclusion. Welcome to Part 4, the final segment of our gentle, extended journey through the strange, mystical, and often quiet obsessions of Adolf Hitler and his inner circle. As always, settle in, dim the lights, and let your mind drift slowly through the soft contours of history. Having explored Hitler's personal fascination with the occult, the ceremonial life of the SS, and the rituals, relics, and prophecies that populated the Third Reich, we now turn our attention to the aftermath and the enduring myths that lingered long after the war. While much of the actual mystical activity was internal, confined to private circles or ceremonial spaces, its stories have persisted, shaped by a mixture of historical fact, speculation, and legend. One of the most enduring tales involves the fate of the Spear of Destiny. After the war, rumors circulated that it had been hidden or taken by Allied forces, its mystical power supposedly intact. Some authors and enthusiasts have imagined secret quests, clandestine operations, and shadowy figures hunting for this ancient relic. In reality, these stories are often slow, meandering, and more interesting for the way they illustrate human fascination with legend than for any actual supernatural consequence. The myth of the Black Sun, too, has outlived the Third Reich. Scholars and popular writers alike have speculated about its supposed energies, its symbolic importance, and the strange ritualized activities of the SS around it. The symbol appears occasionally in modern media and esoteric literature, often stripped of its historical context, yet it retains a quiet allure. There's something hypnotically calm about the idea of a symbol quietly sitting on the floor of a castle, waiting, imagined to hold energy while decades pass outside. Even the more bizarre elements of Nazi mysticism, Atlantis, Vril energy, Teutonic paganism, have seeped into cultural consciousness. They inspire books, documentaries, and speculative histories not because they are verified historical truths, but because they represent the human tendency to intertwine ambition with legend. In this way, Hitler's obsessions continue to drift slowly through the collective imagination, more as curiosities than as active forces. It's also worth noting that many historians emphasize the psychological dimension. Hitler's engagement with mysticism, prophecy, and ritual was as much about personal control and reassurance as it was about ideology. The slow, repetitive nature of ceremonies, the meticulous attention to artifacts and symbols, the careful reading of texts and charts, all of these created a sense of order in a chaotic mind and world. It's almost gentle to imagine. A man deeply flawed,
obsessively curious, quietly seeking structure in the chaos of existence. Meanwhile, the SS's ritualistic life, particularly in locations like Wewelsburg, left behind artifacts, documentation, and architectural traces. Scholars can trace the careful alignment of symbols, the design of ceremonial spaces, and the planned movements within these halls. Each detail contributes to a narrative of deliberate, if eccentric, attention to mystical aesthetics and ideology. It's a slow, careful choreography of belief, showing how myth, history, and power were intertwined in very specific ways. As we float toward the end, it's important to appreciate the contrast between the mundane and the mystical. Hitler and his inner circle lived in a world of politics, strategy, and war, yet they devoted significant time and attention to symbols, relics, and myths. It's a curious, almost soothing rhythm when viewed from a distance. Daily operations punctuated by ceremonial observances, meditative studies, and quiet contemplation of legend. Even the post-war interpretations, often exaggerated or romanticized, carry this slow, mesmerizing quality. They remind us that human fascination with the mystical, the unknown, and the symbolic is persistent. The stories of the Spear of Destiny, the Black Sun, or the lost Aryan homelands are not just remnants of history. They are windows into how a mind, a group, and a culture can slow time down, wrap it in myth, and navigate reality through the lens of imagined forces. So, as we gently conclude this long, calm exploration, we leave with an understanding of Hitler's occult interests as both personal obsession and cultural phenomenon. There's no rush here, no climactic revelation, just a slow, deliberate layering of myth, ritual, and fascination that quietly shaped one of history's most infamous figures. Symbols, prophecies, relics, and rituals all combined into a hypnotic backdrop to events far more tangible and tragic, yet still inviting us to study, reflect, and perhaps let our minds drift. As you rest, consider the subtle patterns of obsession and belief that can exist even in the darkest contexts, the quiet ways people seek control through myth, and the enduring stories that flow gently through history long after the moments themselves have passed. And with that, our long, calm exploration comes to a close. Good night, and may your own dreams be free of relics, prophecies, and mystical obsessions.
Part 5. Hitler's Occult Obsession. Echoes and Reflections. Welcome back, if you're still awake, for our final extended drift into the strange and quiet currents of Hitler's mystical world. Let's settle in, maybe with a soft blanket, and let our minds float gently over the quieter echoes of these obsessions long after the immediate events of history. Even after the fall of the Third Reich, the myths surrounding Hitler's mystical pursuits lingered, often morphing into new narratives, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes strangely mundane. Writers, documentarians, and enthusiasts have explored tales of hidden relics, secret prophecies, and mystical symbols, each retelling adding layers of soft intrigue. The real events were often simple: Hitler reading, Himmler organizing rituals, officers quietly participating. Yet in imagination they have drifted into shadows of legend. Consider the cultural fascination with the Spear of Destiny or with the Black Sun. These objects, symbols, and spaces have become metaphors in books, movies, and documentaries, not for any real power, but for the enduring human attraction to mystery.
There's a calm, almost hypnotic rhythm to how stories evolve over time. An artifact discovered here, a symbol described there, a ritual interpreted differently, all slowly layering into myth. It's gentle, really, how imagination can stretch across decades, breathing life into what once was merely obsession. We can also reflect on the personal dimension once more. Hitler's engagement with mysticism, prophecy, and ritual may have been partly about control, but also about narrative. He constructed a world in which events, fate, and identity were legible, understandable, and shaped by symbolic meaning. This is something quietly human, the desire to make sense of a chaotic world, even if the lens is skewed or the conclusions troubling. The SS's ceremonial life continues to be studied for its hypnotic precision and ritualized repetition. Wewelsburg Castle, with its black sun and carefully arranged rooms, represents not only ideological obsession, but also a kind of architectural meditation. Slow movements, deliberate arrangement, symbolic objects, all of these point to the human tendency to create ritual as a framework for thought and behavior. There's something strangely calming in imagining the sequence, the careful precision, the quiet attention to detail. Then there's the broader idea of myth-making in general. Hitler's obsession is an extreme example, but it illuminates something about how humans interact with symbols, stories, and the imagined past. Lost civilizations, sacred relics, prophecies, runes, these are all tools through which people attempt to navigate uncertainty. In Hitler's case, the consequences were catastrophic. But if we step back and let ourselves float in the narrative, there's a subtle rhythm to these obsessions, slow, repetitive, deeply patterned, almost like a long, measured breath across the pages of history. Finally, we can drift into reflection. These obsessions, these quiet currents of ritual and symbol, reveal how history, myth, and imagination intertwine. They remind us that beneath the loud surface of politics, war, and leadership, there can exist private worlds, slow-moving, obsessive, meticulously organized, and deeply human in their desire for order. The objects, the symbols, the ceremonial spaces all serve as markers of a mind seeking structure, certainty, and meaning. So, as Part 5 closes, let your thoughts settle on the soft repetition of symbols, the gentle layering of myth over reality, and the curious persistence of legend. The stories of relics, runes, and rituals flow quietly through the decades, not as forces of fate, but as reminders of how imagination can linger long after the man and the empire themselves have faded. Good night, and let the quiet currents of history carry you slowly into rest, free from prophecies and relics, but carrying with you the gentle rhythm of reflection.
Part 6. Hitler's Occult Obsession. Reflections on Legacy and Myth. Welcome back for Part 6. A quiet continuation, where we drift even further into the lingering effects of Hitler's fascination with mysticism and ritual. As always, take a deep breath, settle into your favorite chair or bed, and let the pace remain slow and soothing. This isn't about shock or thrill. It's about gentle observation, letting the details of history float past like autumn leaves on a still pond. Even decades after 1945, the stories of Hitler's occult interests ripple quietly through culture and scholarship. The myths of hidden treasures,
mystical artifacts, and secret prophecies continued to fascinate, not because they hold real power, but because they represent an intersection of ambition, obsession, and imagination. There's a soft cadence here, almost hypnotic. Human curiosity stretching across time, connecting relics, symbols, and ideas to our ongoing attempts to understand the past. Consider how these beliefs influenced those around him. Himmler, as we've seen, didn't just indulge Hitler's interests, he expanded them, creating elaborate ceremonies and mystical structures within the SS. The careful choreography of ritual, the symbolic architecture, and the slow, deliberate movements all reinforced a narrative of destiny and supremacy. From the outside, these practices may appear theatrical, but for participants, they provided a sense of order, purpose, and even if misguided, comfort. There is also a quiet irony in the endurance of these stories. Many post-war narratives exaggerate or romanticize Hitler's mystical pursuits, but the historical record shows something more mundane and human, a leader obsessed with certainty, control, and narrative, finding solace in symbols, runes, relics, and ritual. The slow accumulation of meaning through repeated ceremonial acts is almost meditative, even when applied to destructive ends. It reminds us that obsession is often less dramatic than it seems. It's mostly quiet, repetitive, and strangely calming to those who practice it. One can imagine Hitler alone reviewing texts on lost civilizations, prophecies, or ancient myths, as his advisors discussed logistics or campaigns. These quiet hours, filled with symbols and imagined histories, may have served as a mental buffer from the chaos of power. It's a soft, almost sleepy rhythm, reading, contemplating, arranging, considering, like a slow, repeated pattern tracing a circle in the sand. The cultural echoes of these obsessions are similarly gentle. Writers, filmmakers, and historians continue to explore the Thule Society, the Vril Society, the Spear of Destiny, and the Black Sun. The details often blur between fact and speculation, but the persistent interest shows how myth, symbol, and history weave together over decades. It's not about sensationalism. It's about the slow drift of ideas, the quiet human fascination with mysteries that promise meaning and coherence. Even Hitler's imagined connections to ancient Germanic paganism and Aryan ancestry illustrate a methodical layering of myth over reality. These were carefully curated narratives, constructed to support ideology, identity, and authority. For the historian, it's like watching a slow-moving river of belief meandering through documents, artifacts, and ceremonial spaces, leaving behind sediment of narrative, symbolism, and legend. It's steady, almost soporific and mesmerizing in its continuity. And finally, Part 6 invites reflection on the subtle lessons embedded in these histories. The allure of relics, runes, prophecies, and rituals demonstrate the quiet human desire to structure chaos, find patterns, and assign meaning. Hitler's obsessions were extreme and tragically consequential, but at their core, they reveal a slow, methodical rhythm of thought, carefully layering myth, symbolism, and ritual over reality, as one might layer sheets on a bed or tiles in a mosaic. It's the human tendency to seek order,
reflected in a historical figure whose obsessions have outlasted him in story and legend. As we drift toward the close of Part 6, let your mind settle on the gentle patterns, the quiet obsessions, and the soft layering of myth over history. The rituals, the relics, the runes, and the prophecies all form a slow, repeating rhythm flowing across time. And with that, we leave Hitler's mystical obsessions behind, not as threats or secrets, but as quiet echoes in the vast river of human history, soft and hypnotic, inviting reflection and calm.
Part 7. Hitler's Occult Obsession, the Quiet Currents of Influence. Welcome back, if you're still awake, to Part 7. Let's continue our gentle drift through the peculiar and quiet world of Hitler's mystical interests. Imagine soft candlelight, a slow rhythm of narration, and let your mind follow the patterns of history at an unhurried pace. As we have observed, Hitler's fascination with the occult was not simply a curiosity. It shaped the environment around him. His inner circle, particularly Himmler, took these interests seriously, embedding them into the rituals, architecture, and culture of the SS. It's almost mesmerizing to picture officers slowly processing through Wewelsburg Castle, the black sun on the floor, the muted echoes of ceremonial movement as if they were participating in a long meditative dance. The symbolic and ritualistic practices weren't limited to ceremonies. They extended into everyday behavior, into the way spaces were arranged, the careful positioning of symbols and relics, the selection of art and imagery. Every object, every rune, every artifact reinforced a subtle narrative that history, destiny, and ideology were intertwined. And this rhythm was deliberate, slow, and methodical. One might almost compare it to arranging a vast collection of intricate dominoes, each piece carefully placed, each movement calculated, but executed in a quiet, almost soothing pace. Hitler himself was drawn to prophecy not for immediate guidance, but as a framework to structure his understanding of the world. The writings of Guido von List and other mystical authors were, in effect, narrative scaffolds, slowly supporting a worldview that tied past, present, and future into a cohesive, if imagined, structure. It's not thrilling in the dramatic sense, but there is a hypnotic cadence in imagining him carefully reviewing texts, cross-referencing prophecies, and reflecting on symbols late into the night. Even the pseudo-scientific expeditions, those journeys to ancient ruins or sacred sites, had a tranquil, methodical quality. The participants would move slowly, examining stones, dusting artifacts, mapping landscapes. Each action reinforced a narrative of continuity, of ancestral power and destiny. Viewed in this light, there's subtle elegance in the way these obsessions were organized, deliberate, slow, and rhythmically consistent. We can also pause to consider the psychological dimension. These quiet rituals and obsessions offered a measure of control, a soothing regularity in a turbulent world. It's gentle, in a way, to think of ritual as a soft counterbalance to chaos. Even though the consequences of these beliefs were catastrophic in reality, the behavior itself, reading, meditating on symbols, arranging relics, follows a calm, repetitive pattern that invites reflection. Furthermore, the cultural echoes persist. Today, researchers, historians, and enthusiasts continue to study the Thule Society, the Real Society, and other mystical elements associated with Hitler's inner circle. While sensationalized interpretations abound, the real story remains methodical and slow-moving,
Obsessive cataloging of ideas, careful study of myth and legend, and deliberate construction of ritualized practice. The soft, hypnotic nature of this rhythm makes it suitable for our slow, reflective exploration. Finally, it's worth considering the human element beneath the extremity. Hitler's mystical pursuits, like any obsession, were partly about making sense of the world, imposing order on uncertainty, and finding reassurance in symbols. The repeated engagement with relics, runes, prophecies, and ceremonies demonstrates a quiet human desire to structure thought and action. Viewed from a distance, this behavior is oddly meditative, careful, rhythmic, and patterned. It's the pulse beneath the tumult, soft and consistent, inviting calm observation. As Part 7 winds down, we can linger on these gentle currents of history. The rituals, artifacts, prophecies, and myths form a slow-moving stream, intertwining imagination and reality. Hitler's obsessions remind us that even in dark, extreme contexts, human behavior can exhibit a calm, repetitive, and almost hypnotic rhythm. The quiet influence of these mystical interests persisted beyond the Reich itself, leaving echoes in cultural memory, scholarship, and storytelling. So, as you drift along with this narration, imagine the slow procession of symbols, the careful placement of artifacts, and the quiet hum of ritual echoing through time. There is no rush, no sudden climax, just the gentle, enduring flow of obsession, myth, and reflection, soft and methodical, carrying us further into the currents of history.
Part 8. Hitler's Occult Obsession. Final Reflections and Lingering Echoes. Welcome once more to the last part of our extended exploration. As always, make sure you're comfortable, perhaps wrapped in a soft blanket, with the lights dimmed just enough to let your mind float. This final segment will drift slowly through the lasting effects of Hitler's mystical pursuits, the quiet currents of myth, and the subtle lessons embedded in these histories. Even long after the fall of the Third Reich, the stories of Hitler's fascination with the occult continued to ripple quietly through culture, scholarship, and imagination. The Spear of Destiny, the Black Sun, the Thule and Vril societies, the mystical runes and reconstructed rituals, they have persisted in memory, not as active forces in the world, but as enduring curiosities. These are slow-moving stories, meandering through decades, quietly reshaping the way some people perceive history. The rhythm of their persistence is hypnotic, one layer of myth, then another, blending fact and speculation, gently carrying the imagination along. It's important to note that the mystical elements of the Third Reich were always intertwined with human psychology. Hitler's obsessive interest in prophecy, relics, ancient myths, and sacred symbols was not simply about ideology, it was also about control, structure, and reassurance. In a chaotic world, he sought stability in ritual, narrative, and symbolic action. The act of engaging with these ideas, reading, studying, arranging, meditating, follows a quiet, repetitive rhythm. Imagine the gentle turning of pages, the soft echo of footsteps through castle halls, the careful alignment of ceremonial objects. It's methodical, soothing in a strange way, and profoundly human in its need for order. The SS, under Himmler, amplified this rhythm, embedding ritual and symbolism into everyday practice. Webelsburg Castle, with its black sun in the floor, its runic inscriptions and ceremonial spaces, became a focal point for slow, deliberate processes of ideological reinforcement. Officers moved in quiet, choreographed sequences, participating in meditative ceremonies intended to strengthen allegiance, internalize myths, and evoke ancestral power.
From an external perspective, it may appear theatrical, even absurd. But the cadence of these rituals was hypnotic and immersive for participants, a slow, almost lulling immersion in symbolic order. Hitler's engagement with pseudo-archaeology and lost civilizations further illustrates the gentle layering of myth over reality. Expeditions to ancient ruins, forests, and sacred sites were carried out at a methodical pace, dusting off stones, examining inscriptions, mapping landscapes. Each discovery, each artifact became another node in a narrative designed to tie the present to an imagined heroic past. The slow accumulation of these details created a structured mental environment, a quiet order amidst the chaos of political and military life. Prophecy and astrology added another layer to this rhythm. Whether he truly believed in these predictions or simply found comfort in their structure, Hitler's engagement with them was meticulous and deliberate. Daily consultation, reflection on charts, and analysis of ancient texts contributed to a methodical pacing of thought. One could almost picture him alone in a dimly lit room, reading, contemplating, and quietly fitting pieces of legend and foretelling into the broader narrative of his imagined destiny. There's a curious calm in this mental image, a slow rhythm of obsession and pattern that is hypnotic if observed from a distance. The cultural and scholarly echoes of these obsessions have persisted long after the fall of the Reich. Books, documentaries, and research continue to examine the Thule Society, the Vril Society, the Black Sun, and the mystical elements of the SS. While some accounts are sensationalized, the enduring fascination demonstrates a human tendency to explore mystery, legend, and symbolic narrative. These are slow-moving currents through memory and imagination, quietly connecting the historical record to contemporary reflection. We can also consider the human lesson embedded in these histories. Hitler's mystical pursuits, though extreme and morally catastrophic, reveal a broader truth about obsession and ritual. The human mind seeks patterns, order, and meaning. Symbols, relics, ceremonies, and prophecies are tools in this slow construction of understanding. When viewed from a calm, reflective distance, they follow a deliberate, methodical rhythm. Repeated action, careful attention, structured thought. There is a hypnotic, almost meditative quality to this pattern, one that persists long after the immediate historical events have passed. Even the myths and legends inspired by Hitler's obsessions are part of this slow, reflective current. Tales of lost relics, secret societies, and mystical powers are largely harmless in the present, yet they demonstrate how stories continue to drift through time. Each retelling adds another layer of rhythm, another repetition of fascination, gently carrying the imagination through history's quieter channels. It's the persistence of curiosity, the slow unfolding of legend, and the layering of narrative over reality. So, as we bring Part 8 to a close, let your thoughts settle on the subtle currents we've traced together. The meticulous rituals, the soft fascination with prophecy, the careful arrangement of relics and symbols, and the slow, hypnotic repetition of myth over reality. Hitler's obsessions, while morally and historically significant, also reveal a strangely meditative human pattern, the pursuit of order through symbols, stories, and ritual. The cadence is gentle, the rhythm is slow, and the legacy, soft and persistent, invites reflection rather than shock. Let the mind rest on these quiet patterns, the layers of myth, the rhythm of ritual, and the enduring echoes of imagination across time. Symbols and prophecies, relics and rituals drift gently through history like slow-moving clouds. There is no climax here, no sudden revelation,
just the hypnotic, methodical unfolding of obsession, reflection, and the human desire for understanding. And with that, our long, calm journey through Hitler's mystical world comes to a gentle close. Good night, and may your own thoughts drift as slowly and softly as the currents of history we've traced together tonight.
Part 9. Hitler's Occult Obsession. Ripples through history and memory. Welcome back, if you're still with me, to Part 9. Let's allow ourselves to drift gently as we float further into the quieter, lingering currents of Hitler's mystical obsessions. Make sure your surroundings are comfortable, the lights soft, and your attention calm. There is no rush here, only the slow, methodical unfolding of history, myth, and reflection. Even decades after the events of the Third Reich, the echoes of Hitler's fascination with the mystical continued to ripple quietly. Scholars, documentarians, and cultural commentators still examined the rituals, the relics, the prophecies, and the symbols that occupied him and his inner circle. Some stories, like the Spear of Destiny or the Black Sun, have taken on almost mythological qualities, drifting through popular imagination like clouds across a still sky. The narratives are slow, meandering, often contradictory, and yet they persist. Proof that human curiosity and fascination with mystery have a long, unhurried life of their own. Psychologically, Hitler's obsession with symbols, rituals, and prophecy offers insight into the human need for order. In a world of chaos, uncertainty, and constant political upheaval, he created a meticulously ordered private universe. Daily routines of study, reflection, and ceremonial practice provided a slow rhythm, a sense of stability, and an illusion of control. There is a quiet, almost meditative quality to imagining these routines. The soft flicker of candlelight on a relic, the careful alignment of runes, the slow review of a dusty manuscript. It is repetitive, deliberate, and strangely soothing if removed from the immediate historical consequences. Himmler's SS ritualism amplified these currents. Wewelsburg Castle, with its symbolic architecture and ceremonial black sun, became a focal point for immersive, slow-moving practices. Officers processed through the halls with precision, repeating gestures and recitations in a manner that reinforced ideological narratives. The cadence of these rituals, while designed to instill loyalty and mythic purpose, also created a gentle hypnotic rhythm, a steady pulse beneath the chaotic surface of military life. One can almost picture the quiet steps, the measured movements, and the soft echoes as a slow, human meditation. Hitler's fascination with ancient civilizations, Atlantis myths, and reconstructed Germanic paganism further exemplifies the layering of narrative over reality. Archaeological expeditions, document study, and careful collection of artifacts were not just political tools, they were rituals of imagination. The slow, repetitive act of brushing dust from stones, examining inscriptions, and mapping sites created a tangible, measured rhythm. It is almost soothing to consider, a ritualized, meticulous engagement with history that mirrors the human need to find structure in the world. Astrology, prophecy, and esoteric writings added another dimension to this slow, hypnotic pattern. Whether Hitler believed in the predictive power of stars or texts, he engaged with them carefully, deliberately, and methodically. Daily readings, consultations with advisors, and cross-referencing of mystical texts created a rhythm akin to a soft, repeated chant. It is gentle in its repetitiveness, a slow pulse that guided thought, decision, and the private imagination of power.
Cultural echoes of these obsessions are equally persistent. Modern media, historical literature, and popular curiosity continue to explore Thule and Vril societies, mystical symbols, and the ceremonial practices of the SS. These stories, often exaggerated or romanticized, demonstrate a fascinating, slow-moving current. The persistence of myth, the layering of legend, and the human desire to understand the strange and the hidden. They are gentle reminders that even the darkest histories leave behind soft, drifting traces in the collective imagination. Even the personal, intimate dimension of obsession is worth reflection. Hitler's engagement with mysticism, like any obsession, was largely about personal order. Careful attention to ritual, structure, and symbolic coherence in a life otherwise dominated by chaos. The repeated study of relics, the slow movement through ceremonial spaces, the measured reading of prophecies, all of these actions formed a quiet rhythm. It is methodical, hypnotic, and oddly meditative when observed from a distance, strict of their catastrophic real-world consequences. Finally, Part 9 invites a reflection on the human tendency toward myth, ritual, and obsession. The precise, deliberate layering of symbols, stories, and beliefs over reality demonstrates a slow, patient engagement with the world. Hitler's mystical interests, extreme as they were, reveal a subtle, universal pattern. The search for control, narrative, and understanding through repetition and symbolic action. The cadence is soft, hypnotic, and enduring, rippling gently through memory, scholarship, and cultural imagination. As we gently conclude Part 9, let your mind rest on these slow-moving currents. The soft repetition of ritual, the quiet persistence of myth, and the careful layering of narrative over reality. Symbols, relics, prophecies, and ceremonies drift through history like a calm river, carrying with them reflections of human desire, fascination, and the endless rhythm of curiosity. There is no climax here, only the gentle unfolding of obsession, pattern, and reflection. A hypnotic cadence to carry you slowly into thought, contemplation, and perhaps rest. Part 10. Hitler's Occult Obsession. Final reflections on myth, memory, and human pattern. Welcome, once more, to Part 10. Let's settle in for another gentle passage through the slow currents of history, lingering in the quiet, measured world of Hitler's mystical obsessions. Dim the lights, get comfortable, and allow your mind to follow the soft, unhurried rhythm of this narration. Even long after the collapse of the Third Reich, the echoes of Hitler's fascination with prophecy, relics, and ancient myth continue to drift through history and culture. Stories of the Spear of Destiny, the Black Sun, and the Thule and Vril societies persist, carried forward in books, documentaries, and scholarly research. These are slow-moving ripples, not waves of sudden revelation, but gentle currents that invite reflection and curiosity. They demonstrate the enduring human fascination with mystery and the persistence of imagination across time. Hitler's personal engagement with ritual, symbols, and prophecy provides insight into a broader human pattern, the desire to impose order on chaos. The daily study of texts, contemplation of ancient myths, and careful alignment of ceremonial spaces created a structured mental rhythm. There's a soft, hypnotic quality to imagining him quietly arranging relics, consulting mystical charts, and reflecting on prophecies late into the evening. It is repetitive, deliberate, and methodical, a subtle meditation embedded in obsession. The SS, under Himmler, amplified and ritualized these quiet currents. Wewelsburg Castle, with its ceremonial spaces, black sun motif, and runic inscriptions, became a center for slow, deliberate ritual. Officers processed carefully through the halls, performing gestures and recitations meant to reinforce ideology and mythic purpose. The cadence of these ceremonies was immersive, hypnotic, and strangely calming in its repetition. One can imagine the soft echoes of footsteps, the measured recitation of symbolic texts, and the gentle, rhythmic pulse of ritual unfolding over time. Hitler's fascination with pseudo-archaeology and lost civilizations added further layers to this slow, hypnotic pattern. Expeditions to ancient ruins, forests, and sacred sites involved careful, measured observation. Each artifact examined, each inscription studied, became a node in an imagined historical narrative. The physical movements of these explorations, dusting stones, measuring relics, mapping landscapes, followed a slow, contemplative rhythm, reinforcing a structured view of history and destiny. Astrology, prophecy, and esoteric texts formed another dimension of this rhythm. Whether or not Hitler truly believed in the predictive power of these practices, the careful consultation of charts, reflection on mystical writings, and cross-referencing of prophecies created a slow cadence of thought. Picture him in a dimly lit room, pages open, fingers tracing lines of text, quietly building patterns of meaning. It is repetitive and methodical, a gentle, hypnotic pulse guiding reflection and private imagination. The cultural echoes of these mystical obsessions are equally slow-moving. Post-war research, documentaries, and literature continue to explore the rituals, symbols, and pseudo-religious practices of the SS. The myths, often exaggerated, persist in subtle ways, reminders that human fascination with mystery and ritual is enduring. These stories drift through decades, quietly layering legend over reality, and in doing so demonstrate the soft, hypnotic rhythm of cultural memory. Even the psychological aspect of Hitler's obsession is worth lingering over. Beyond ideology and ambition, these rituals and interests provided a sense of stability and control. The repetitive study of relics, the careful arrangement of ceremonial spaces, and the methodical reflection on prophecy all formed a rhythm that structured thought and action. It is meditative, patterned, and oddly calming to imagine from a distance. Obsession, in this sense, is less about dramatic action and more about repeated, quiet attention over time, a hypnotic, almost lullaby-like cadence. Finally, Part 10 invites reflection on human patterns more broadly. Hitler's mystical interests, extreme as they were, reflect a universal desire to impose order, seek meaning, and structure reality through repetition, symbol, and narrative. The slow layering of myth over history, ritual over chaos, and pattern over uncertainty forms a persistent rhythm, quiet, measured, and hypnotic. These currents continue to drift through culture, scholarship, and memory long after the events themselves have passed. And with that, Part 10 comes to a serene close. Let the mind drift with the currents of history, free from urgency, guided by quiet, repetitive rhythms, and carried softly into reflection and rest.
Part 11. Hitler's Occult Obsession, Subtle Currents of Influence and Reflection. Welcome back, if you're still awake, to Part 11. Let's continue to drift slowly through the quiet and meticulous world of Hitler's mystical interests. Make sure you're comfortable, lights soft, and mind relaxed. We're not rushing anywhere, just floating along the calm, hypnotic currents of history. Even decades after the Third Reich, the subtle influence of Hitler's fascination with mysticism can still be traced in cultural memory, scholarship, and popular imagination. The legends of the Spear of Destiny, the Black Sun, and the Thule and Vril societies persist, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes muted, drifting quietly across books, documentaries, and casual discussion. They form a slow rhythm, demonstrating the human tendency to attach fascination to mystery and the unknown. Psychologically, Hitler's obsessive engagement with relics, rituals, and prophecy reveals a desire to create order in a world of chaos. His daily study of texts, his careful reflection on symbols, and the measured performance of ceremonial practices offered a structured rhythm for thought and action. Imagine him, alone in a dimly lit room, leafing through manuscripts, adjusting artifacts, quietly considering the meaning of prophecies. A slow, deliberate pattern of engagement that is oddly hypnotic when removed from the consequences of history. Himmler and the SS amplified these patterns through ritualized practice and architectural symbolism. Wewelsburg Castle, with its black sun, runic inscriptions, and ceremonial layout, created spaces for slow, immersive ritual. Officers processed carefully, repeating gestures and recitations, reinforcing ideological narratives and mythic identity. From the outside, these practices may seem theatrical, but their rhythm was precise, immersive, and hypnotic. One can almost hear the soft echo of footsteps and the gentle murmur of recitations, like a quiet metronome marking time. Hitler's interest in ancient civilizations and Germanic paganism added another layer to this slow, patterned world. Expeditions to ruins, forests, and sacred sites involved deliberate, meticulous observation. Brushing dust from stones, noting inscriptions, mapping landscapes. Each action reinforced a constructed narrative of heritage and destiny. The repetitive, measured quality of these acts formed a hypnotic cadence, almost meditative in its careful attention to detail. Prophecies and astrology were incorporated into this rhythm as well. Whether he believed in their predictive power or simply found structure in them, the slow consultation of mystical texts created a deliberate mental cadence. One can imagine the quiet focus, the repetitive tracing of symbols, and the methodical recording of observations. A gentle, hypnotic cycle of thought. The post-war cultural fascination with these mystical elements demonstrates the persistence of myth. Books, documentaries, and historical analyses continue to explore Thule and Vril societies, ceremonial practices of the SS, and the supposed power of symbols like the Black Sun. These stories drift through decades, layering imagination over historical record. Their rhythm is slow and methodical, inviting reflection rather than excitement, quiet observation rather than thrill. Even the psychological aspect of Hitler's fascination with mysticism is revealing. The obsessive study of relics, the careful alignment of ceremonial spaces, and the repeated reflection on prophecy all offered stability in a chaotic world. The rhythm is steady, hypnotic, and methodical. Repetitive action, deliberate attention, a quiet human search for control. Viewed from a distance, it is meditative, slow-moving, and strangely calming. Finally, Part 11 invites reflection on the universal patterns underlying these obsessions.
Hitler's mystical pursuits, while extreme, illustrate a broader human tendency to impose order, to structure thought and behavior through symbols, rituals, and myth. The slow layering of legend over history, ritual over chaos, and pattern over uncertainty forms a persistent rhythm. These currents continue to flow through scholarship, memory, and imagination, long after the events themselves have passed. As we drift toward the close of Part 11, let your mind rest on these slow, reflective currents. The measured repetition of ritual, the quiet layering of myth over reality, the hypnotic pulse of obsession and reflection. There is no rush, no climax, only the gentle, continuous unfolding of human pattern, fascination, and curiosity. A soft river of historical meditation, carrying us gently through time.
Part 12. Hitler's occult obsession, the slow currents of history and human pattern. Welcome back to Part 12. Let's settle in once more, letting the soft rhythm of history carry us along. Dim the lights, get comfortable, and allow your thoughts to drift slowly as we continue to explore the subtle currents of Hitler's fascination with the mystical and the ritualized. There is no hurry, no sharp turns, but just the gentle, hypnotic flow of observation and reflection. Even decades after the Third Reich, the echoes of Hitler's mystical pursuits continued to ripple through memory and culture. Stories of the Spear of Destiny, the Black Sun, and the Thule and Vril societies persist, slowly drifting through books, documentaries, and casual conversation. They are not immediate threats or revelations, but soft, persistent currents of curiosity and fascination. These tales illustrate how myth, symbol, and obsession can quietly endure, layering imagination over historical reality, gently shaping our perception of the past. Psychologically, Hitler's obsession with relics, prophecy, and ritual reveals a need for structure and control. The daily study of mystical texts, the careful handling of symbols, and the repetitive performance of ceremonial acts created a steady rhythm in his life. One can imagine him alone, in a quiet room, flickering candlelight, fingers tracing runes, eyes scanning ancient manuscripts. Each action is methodical, deliberate, and hypnotic in its repetition. This rhythm is oddly soothing when considered at a distance, a quiet meditation of obsession and pattern. Himmler's SS rituals amplified and formalized this hypnotic rhythm. Wewelsburg Castle, with its ceremonial halls, black sun motif, and runic inscriptions, became the focal point for slow, deliberate practice. Officers moved carefully, reciting lines, performing gestures, and participating in ceremonies designed to reinforce ideology and mythic purpose. The cadence of these rituals was immersive, precise, and quietly mesmerizing. Picture the soft echo of footsteps, the measured cadence of recitation, the gentle alignment of ceremonial objects, a rhythm that seems almost meditative. Hitler's fascination with ancient civilizations and Germanic paganism added further layers to this hypnotic structure. Expeditions to ruins, sacred forests, and archaeological sites involved slow, deliberate observation, brushing dust from stones, measuring artifacts, noting inscriptions, mapping terrain. Each small action contributed to a constructed narrative of ancestry, heritage, and destiny. The measured pace, repetitive attention, and deliberate focus form a slow, almost lullaby-like rhythm, a meditation on myth and history entwined. Prophecies and astrology added another dimension to this persistent cadence. Whether he believed in their predictive power or simply found comfort in their structure, Hitler's daily consultations and reflections created a gentle mental rhythm. Pages turned, symbols traced, observations recorded. Repetition and pattern forming a quiet, hypnotic pulse. It is meditative, methodical, and strangely calming in its meticulousness. Cultural echoes of these mystical obsessions also drift slowly through time. Post-war research, literature, and media continued to explore the rituals, symbols, and societies associated with Hitler's inner circle. Even as myths become exaggerated or romanticized, they retain the slow, meandering rhythm of history and imagination. The fascination persists, layering curiosity over memory, demonstrating the subtle ways that human attention clings to mystery and ritual. Finally, Part 12 invites reflection on the broader human pattern. Hitler's mystical pursuits, while extreme, illuminate a universal tendency: the desire to structure reality, impose order, and find meaning through ritual, symbol, and narrative. The slow layering of myth over history, pattern over chaos, and ritual over uncertainty forms a persistent rhythm that continues to ripple through scholarship, culture, and imagination. These currents are quiet, steady, and hypnotic, slow rivers of reflection flowing through time. As Part 12 comes to a gentle close, let your mind rest on these slow currents, the repetition of ritual, the layering of myth, the measured cadence of obsession and reflection. There is no climax, no sudden revelation. Only the soft, enduring rhythm of human curiosity, imagination, and the quiet persistence of history. Let it carry you gently through thought, reflection, and perhaps into rest.
Part 13. Hitler's Occult Obsession, Lingering Currents and Quiet Reflections. Welcome back to Part 13. As always, let's slow down, let your body relax, and let your mind float gently along the calm currents of history. There's no urgency here, just the soft, deliberate unfolding of thought, ritual, and reflection. Even decades after the Third Reich, the subtle echoes of Hitler's mystical pursuits continue to ripple through culture, scholarship, and imagination. Tales of the Spear of Destiny, the Black Sun, and secret societies like the Tula and Vril persist in books, documentaries, and discussions, quietly weaving themselves into modern fascination. They are not loud or immediate, but they endure, demonstrating the slow-moving rhythm of myth layered over historical reality. There's a hypnotic quality to how stories like these drift through decades, gently accumulating layers of meaning, exaggeration, and curiosity. Psychologically, Hitler's obsession with prophecy, relics, and ritual reflects a broader human tendency to create order amidst uncertainty. Daily engagement with texts,
careful contemplation of symbols and the repetitive performance of ceremonial acts provided a steady rhythm to his life. Imagine him alone in a dim room, candlelight flickering, fingers tracing runes or annotations in a book, eyes scanning pages for patterns and meaning. The pace is slow, deliberate, and repetitive, a quiet meditation on narrative and destiny. Himmler and the SS amplified this rhythm through ritualized practice and symbolic architecture. Wewelsburg Castle, with its ceremonial halls, black sun motif, and runic inscriptions, became a stage for slow, methodical ritual. Officers moved carefully through its spaces, reciting phrases, performing gestures, and reinforcing mythic narratives. The cadence of these ceremonies was immersive and precise, almost hypnotic in its steady repetition. One can imagine the soft echoes of steps on stone floors, the measured alignment of symbols, and the gentle rhythm of collective participation. A slow, meditative pulse. Hitler's fascination with ancient civilizations, pseudo-archaeology, and Germanic paganism added another layer to this measured rhythm. Expeditions to ruins, sacred forests, and archaeological sites were slow and deliberate, brushing dust from stones, mapping inscriptions, recording details. Each small act contributed to a carefully constructed narrative of heritage, ancestry, and destiny. The pace of these rituals and studies was contemplative, repetitive, and soothing, forming a hypnotic cadence of attention to pattern and structure. Prophecies, astrology, and esoteric texts further reinforced this rhythm. Whether Hitler truly believed in their predictive power or simply found comfort in their structure, the daily practice of consulting, reflecting, and recording created a steady mental pulse. Pages turned, symbols traced, notes made, a gentle repetition, methodical and hypnotic in nature. The rhythm is slow, steady, and meditative, drawing attention inward while forming a pattern that structures thought and behavior. Cultural echoes of these mystical interests persist in a quiet, subtle way. Post-war studies, literature, and media continue to examine the rituals, symbols, and mythologies of Hitler's inner circle. Exaggerated accounts of relics, secret societies, and mystical power still capture the imagination, drifting slowly through collective memory. These currents of fascination are deliberate, layered, and enduring, quietly shaping our understanding of obsession, ritual, and historical narrative. Part 13 also encourages reflection on human behavior. Hitler's mystical pursuits, as extreme as they were, reveal universal patterns: the desire for order, the attraction to repetition, the comfort of ritual and symbol. Layering myth over history, pattern over chaos, and ritual over uncertainty creates a slow, persistent rhythm, a cadence that flows through time and memory, quietly echoing across culture and scholarship. These subtle currents demonstrate how even the darkest obsessions follow a gentle, methodical pulse when observed from a reflective distance. As Part 13 drifts to a close, let your thoughts rest on the quiet repetition of ritual, the slow layering of myth, and the enduring rhythm of curiosity and reflection. There is no climax, no shock, only the hypnotic flow of human fascination and pattern, moving gently through history. Let it carry you softly through thought, reflection, and calm, preparing the mind for rest.
Part 14. Hitler's Occult Obsession. The Enduring Whisper of Ritual and Myth. Welcome back to Part 14. As always, let's slow down, sink into comfort, and allow our minds to drift gently along the calm currents of history. There's no urgency here, just the soft unfolding of reflection, pattern, and quiet observation.
Decades after the fall of the Third Reich, the subtle echoes of Hitler's mystical interests continue to ripple quietly. The legends of the Spear of Destiny, the Black Sun, and secret societies like the Thule and Vril linger in books, documentaries, and cultural imagination. These stories drift slowly through time, accumulating layers of myth, speculation, and fascination. There is a hypnotic cadence to this persistence, soft, repetitive, and quietly enduring across decades. Hitler's personal engagement with ritual, prophecy, and relics reflects a desire for order amidst chaos. Daily study of esoteric texts, careful contemplation of symbols, and measured performance of ceremonial practices formed a steady, methodical rhythm. Imagine him in a dimly lit study, tracing runes with his finger, reviewing ancient manuscripts, eyes scanning for patterns and hidden meaning. The repetition, slow pace, and deliberate attention to detail are strangely meditative when observed from a distance. The SS, under Himmler, institutionalized these rhythms. Wewelsburg Castle, with its runic inscriptions, ceremonial halls, and black sun floor, became the stage for slow, deliberate ritual. Officers moved with precision, repeating gestures and recitations that reinforced ideological narratives. The cadence of these ceremonies, soft and hypnotic, formed an immersive rhythm. Echoing footsteps, measured recitations, careful alignment of symbols. It is almost soothing to picture, a slow, patterned pulse across space and time. Hitler's fascination with pseudo-archaeology, Germanic paganism, and ancient civilizations added further layers to this hypnotic rhythm. Expeditions to ruins, forests, and sacred sites involved careful, deliberate observation. Dusting stones, recording inscriptions, mapping terrain, each small act contributed to a constructed narrative of ancestry and destiny. The slow, repetitive quality of these actions creates a rhythm akin to meditation, a gentle cadence of attention to pattern and meaning. Astrology, prophecy, and esoteric writings reinforced this rhythm. Whether Hitler believed in their predictive power or simply found comfort in their structure, consulting, reflecting, and recording created a steady mental pulse. Pages turned, symbols traced, notes taken, a soft, methodical cycle of engagement, hypnotic in its repetition and rhythm. The cultural echoes of these obsessions persist in subtle ways. Post-war literature, research, and media continue to explore rituals, societies, and symbols associated with Hitler's inner circle. Exaggerated tales of relics or mystical power drift through collective memory like slow-moving clouds, layering imagination over history. The rhythm is gentle, persistent, and hypnotic, a quiet cadence flowing through culture, memory, and scholarship. Part 14 also invites reflection on human behavior. Hitler's mystical obsessions, while extreme, reveal universal patterns: the need for order, the attraction of repetition, the comfort of ritual and symbol. The slow layering of myth over history, ritual over chaos, and pattern over uncertainty forms a persistent, steady rhythm. Observed from a reflective distance, this pulse is gentle, meditative, and hypnotic, an enduring echo of human fascination with pattern, meaning, and story. As Part 14 gently concludes, Let your mind settle on these quiet currents. The repetition of ritual, the layering of myth, the enduring rhythm of curiosity, reflection, and observation. There is no climax, no rush, only the soft, persistent unfolding of human obsession and imagination, carrying us quietly through the vast river of history. Let it soothe, carry, and calm you, like the slow drift of a gentle current into rest.
Part 15. Hitler's Occult Obsession. Quiet Currents, Lingering Shadows. Welcome back to Part 15. Let's settle once again, letting the mind float slowly along the calm currents of history. Dim the lights, get comfortable, and allow yourself to drift gently through reflection and observation. There is no urgency, no climax, only the hypnotic rhythm of repeated patterns and quiet contemplation. Even decades after the collapse of the Third Reich, the echoes of Hitler's fascination with mysticism persist. Tales of the Spear of Destiny, the Black Sun, and secret societies like the Tool and Vril continue to softly drift through books, documentaries, and cultural memory. These stories have a gentle persistence, layering myth over historical fact, slowly building a rhythm that is both reflective and quietly mesmerizing. Psychologically, Hitler's obsession with prophecy, relics, and ritual reveals a human desire for structure and certainty. Daily engagement with esoteric texts, careful observation of symbols, and repetitive ceremonial acts provided a steady rhythm, a personal meditation of control. Imagine him alone in a dim room, candlelight flickering, tracing runes, reviewing manuscripts, eyes scanning for hidden meaning. A slow, deliberate, hypnotic pattern. The SS, under Himmler, institutionalized and amplified this rhythm. Wavelsburg Castle, with its ceremonial halls, runic inscriptions, and black sun motif, became a stage for deliberate ritual. Officers moved with precision, reciting texts, performing gestures, and reinforcing mythic narratives. The cadence was immersive and steady, a soft, hypnotic pulse, echoing through stone corridors and ceremonial spaces. One can almost hear the measured footsteps, the quiet hum of ritual, the rhythm of repetition over time. Hitler's fascination with pseudo-archaeology and ancient Germanic paganism added further layers to this contemplative rhythm. Expeditions to ruins, forests, and sacred sites involved deliberate, careful observation. Brushing dust from stones, mapping inscriptions, recording measurements. Each small action contributed to a constructed narrative of ancestry and destiny. The repetitive, methodical quality of these acts forms a quiet, meditative cadence, gentle and soothing in its rhythm. Astrology, prophecy, and esoteric writings reinforced this subtle pulse. Whether Hitler believed in their predictive power or simply found comfort in the structure, daily consultation and reflection created a steady mental rhythm. Pages turned, symbols traced, notes recorded, repetition, methodical attention, hypnotic cadence. It is a gentle, meditative pulse that continues to echo when observed from a reflective distance. Cultural echoes of these mystical obsessions persist quietly. Post-war research, literature, and media continue to explore the rituals, symbols, and mythologies of Hitler's inner circle. Exaggerated tales of relics, secret societies, and mystical power drift slowly through collective memory, layering imagination over historical reality. These currents are soft, deliberate, and persistent, like gentle streams flowing through decades, shaping fascination, reflection, and memory. As Part 15 drifts toward its close, let your mind rest on these slow, reflective currents. The repetition of ritual, the layering of myth, the persistent rhythm of curiosity and reflection. There is no climax here, no sudden revelation, only the soft, enduring unfolding of human obsession, imagination, and historical memory. Let it carry you gently through thought, reflection, and calm, preparing the mind for rest.
Part 16. Hitler's Occult Obsession. The Gentle End of the Current. Welcome once more to the final part. As always, make sure you are comfortable, light soft, and mind relaxed. This is the gentle conclusion of our long, meandering journey through the quiet and hypnotic currents of Hitler's mystical obsessions. There is no rush, no climax, only reflection, observation, and the steady rhythm of thought. Even decades after the Third Reich, the faint echoes of Hitler's fascination with the mystical continue to drift through memory and culture. Stories of the Spear of Destiny, the Black Sun, and secret societies like the Tula and Vril linger softly in books, documentaries, and academic study. They are not immediate, not urgent, but persistent, like a gentle current weaving its way through decades of curiosity and imagination. Hitler's engagement with ritual, prophecy, and relics offers insight into a human tendency to create structure amidst chaos. Daily study of texts, careful contemplation of symbols, and repeated ceremonial practice formed a steady rhythm in his life. Imagine him quietly tracing runes, reading manuscripts, reflecting on prophecy. The pace slow, deliberate, and hypnotic. It is repetitive, methodical, and almost meditative in its quiet persistence. Himmler and the SS amplified this rhythm, institutionalizing it through ceremonial spaces and ritualized practice. Wewelsburg Castle, with its runic inscriptions, Black Sun motif, and ceremonial halls, became a focal point for immersive, methodical engagement. Officers moved with care, reciting texts, performing gestures, aligning symbols, a hypnotic, immersive cadence echoing softly through stone corridors. Hitler's fascination with pseudo-archaeology, Germanic paganism, and lost civilizations added another layer to this rhythm. Expeditions to ruins, forests, and sacred sites involved deliberate, meticulous observation. Brushing dust from stones, noting inscriptions, mapping terrain. Each small act reinforced a constructed narrative of ancestry and destiny. The repetition and slow pace of these actions form a quiet, meditative cadence, hypnotic and soft. Astrology, prophecy, and esoteric writings further extended this rhythm. Whether he truly believed in their predictive power or found structure in their pattern, the consultation, reflection, and recording of mystical knowledge created a steady mental pulse. Pages turned, symbols traced, notes made, a gentle, repetitive cycle of attention and reflection. Cultural echoes of these obsessions persist gently through history. Literature, research, and media continue to explore rituals, symbols, and mythologies of Hitler's inner circle. Exaggerated tales of relics and secret societies drift softly through collective memory, layering imagination over reality. The rhythm is calm, deliberate, and persistent, a quiet, continuous stream flowing through scholarship and popular fascination alike. And so, our long hypnotic journey through Hitler's mystical obsessions comes to a serene close. Good night, and may your thoughts drift as softly and slowly as the currents of history we have explored together.